Welcome to the SENCast. My name is Dale Pickles. I'm the Managing Director of B Squared and I'm the host of the SENCast. We started this podcast a few years ago as a way to help improve knowledge around SEND. Yes, there is lots of stuff you can go and read, but we're all very busy. We created the SENCast to try and help support schools, and the SENCast is also a great way to get the same consistent message to schools and parents. The SENCast is created and produced by us here at B Squared. We are the assessment people. We are known for helping schools to show the small sets of progress pupils with SEND make. But over the last few years, we've been really focusing on creating an inclusive assessment system that can be used for all pupils in primary. And the system has different levels of detail for different levels of ability. And it just makes looking at whole school data and comparing your SEND and your non-SEND pupils really, really easy. And adding in our AI report writing features and just having a really easy to use system makes so much sense. And as always, by having one system, it's going to save schools money. Visit the B Square website or click on the meeting link in the show notes to book a meeting with me, and I can take you through how our assessment software can help you. This week, I have two guests on the podcast, Dr. Sarah Moseley and Ginny Bootman. Sarah is an educational consultant specialising in reading and self-esteem. And Ginny is currently a SENCO of 4 schools in Northamptonshire. She talks at various events and has also written books for SENCOs. And in this episode, we discuss the foundations of early literacy. What are those building blocks? And what we talked about a lot, nothing to do with literacy or kind of paper in that typical idea. It was actually the precursors. So talking, listening, curiosity, feeling empowered, and how can we encourage and engage those children with literacy, and how we kind of used that and talked about that rather than just letting it get in our way. Now, go and enjoy the podcast. In this week's show, we're discussing foundations of early literacy. What are the building blocks pupils need? My guests this week are Dr. Sarah Moseley and Ginny Bootman. Sarah is an educational consultant specialising in reading and self-esteem. And as an educational consultant, she supports schools to raise outcomes for all learners, helping schools turn theory into practice. Ginny is currently a SENCO of 4 schools, and she has been a teacher for a very long time. Her words, not mine. A senior manager and a head teacher. And both Sarah and Ginny have written books to support professionals. Welcome to the show, Sarah and Ginny.
Hello, Dale.
Hello, Dale.
I always love podcasting with multiple guests. It's a lot more fun, but I am very concerned with you two that I'm not going to get many words in. I could probably take the day off.
Yeah, I think that may be tricky, but we have both had a pre-meet and tried to practice this, Dale. So we're going to give it our best shot.
Yeah, we'll be like the Chuckle sisters or something. we'll try, to me, to you. I think that's how it's going to be.
So you've had a pre-meet to get the talking out.
Yeah, kind of, but it didn't really work because then we had 2 other sessions where we tried to kind of come onto this already, which can be good outtakes for this anyway, where we tried to get our headphones to work. So that was lovely. Yeah. So there you go.
Cool. So this episode is the first in the series around literacy and how to help all learners to succeed. And today we are starting with the foundations of literacy. So what are the foundations?
I think it's really important that we are aware of the fact that these foundations are things that we need to be working on continuously. And kind of the main foundation we're going to talk about today is the importance of oral language. We're going to talk about that kind of building a vocabulary, the importance of that kind of listening and speaking skills, and really thinking about what we're doing continuously to make sure this is embedded across every day. And then we need to kind of look at the subject of phonics and think about actually what happens before that. What's the foundation of phonics? What are we thinking about in terms of phonological and phonemic awareness? All of those really important skills that our learners need to be continuously developing, reflecting back on, having time to practice, having structured teaching around. And then within all of this, they need to be aware of what print means, that print has meaning. They need to understand books. They need to understand text, have those early print concepts, which they have the opportunity to kind of build up that fluency, that comprehension. But again, it's a continuous process. So the foundations are things that need to be developed at the very early beginnings of that reading development, but actually we also need to be continuously thinking about revisiting those, and particularly for those struggling, reluctant or readers, that this is a much more difficult process for them to develop.
Yeah, and I think when we've been talking about this, we actually are talking about keeping things simple, actually just making it part and parcel of the conversations that we have with every child, and keeping the individual at the center of the conversations that we have with them. I think that's it at its simplest.
And knowing as well with that why the things that we are told to do, things like reading to children, or kind of pointing out text in the environment, why those things are so important, why those things are so key for those kind of foundation skills, that whole understanding about that print has meaning, that what I say looks like this on paper, on the screen, and that what I say matters, and it can be recorded in a way that will be there for others to access it. So it's that importance of knowing why we encourage all these things to be continued, and why there's that importance about books, why books are so key, but in so many different ways.
Well, I think the link between speaking and the written word is really important. The fact that I've seen children's faces light up when we've used speech recognition. They say something and it's written down, and it becomes like that light bulb moment, and it has meaning to them.
I would say exactly that. It is, people think of, okay, when we're starting with literacy, they're going to start with a book or paper and writing or reading, but it starts with speaking and listening.
Yeah.
If you can't do it through, if you can't orally structure anything, you can't orally describe something, how are you going to do that holding a pencil or a pen? It's got to start orally. It's got to be starting in the environment, as you said, like recognizing symbols, recognizing things have meaning. All of that is precursor to literacy. Literally doesn't start when you get a book out. It starts within that spoken language kind of area, which has lost its kind of focus, I think, in schools over the last maybe decade.
And I think with the pressures that you get, I think with the pressures within education, I think that's what Ginny and I were talking about as well, and keeping it simple. With the pressures on everything, you forget why these things are really important, what the real baseline of things, getting that spark of, oh, that's interesting, or those words make me feel something or think something. And although, the orally kind of the words and, spoken language is so important, actually it's that spoken in your head as well. So when we're thinking about our minimally verbal or our non-verbal learners, it's that, what I have or think in my head, and then what I might say out loud, that has been replicated in words on a page. And actually how I might think about, I'm doing lots around Harry Potter at the moment, but how I might think about Harry Potter as it's read to me, the things that I think might be different to actually how it's then shown in a film or in animation or in an illustrated book. And those conversations, discussions around that are so key to continually supporting those foundations, because it's that constant kind of revisiting of, oh, that's interesting, you think that, or that word makes you think that, or wow, that's a really interesting word. Let's look at that word. It's that curiosity, that importance of that curiosity around language, and what I say can be written and others can read it, or I can read what others have thought.
I read an interesting thing, segueing off as we always do, and it was a question on social media, and it's like, how many people recognize words, they see them in books, they can use them in the context of a book, but they actually have no idea what it means. So they know how to use it correctly, they can slip it in a sentence perfectly, but don't understand what it really means.
And
quite fun.
Yeah, and it's so important that actually that happens, and that's another thing Ginny and I have been talking about a lot, because it happens so much. And actually, this kind of we understand so much more about how we learn and how we learn to think and how we learn to read, and actually that importance of having lots of ways of understanding something that deepens your learning. So actually, if you're able to understand, and I think, Ginny, what you were talking about, terminology, I was just thinking about the word that I read last night in Charlie and the Great glass elevator, there was a word that I didn't know the meaning of. And actually through looking up the word and talking about it, which I can't think of now, which I will do by the next podcast, it deepens your understanding of that text. It deepens your understanding of the learning process. And generally is that building your vocabulary enables that growth. And we know that already through all of the research, the importance of building our children's vocabulary, our young people's vocabulary, our vocabulary. And I think that's the kind of key that we must remember. So whatever we do, it's important. However we support our young people.
And I think, like you're saying, Sarah, that honesty of, actually, I'm not sure about this word. I was in one of my schools the other day and doing a lesson, and a word came up and I was like, I'm not completely sure what this word means because I haven't come across this word before. Let's find out about it together. And then that opens dialogues about words, and children will ask me about other words. And so if they don't know a word, they're really happy to say, actually, I don't know what that word is. Can you help me? And I think this two-way dialogue between adults and children, and actually adults and adults, that children see those conversations happening between adults. So there's that mirroring, so that it becomes a culture that they're used to, I think is really important. And I also think, I love the use of the word curiosity by Sarah. And I think also revisiting a conversation that a child has had about something, not necessarily a book, it might be somewhere they've been or a picture that they've seen, revisiting that. And Sarah and I have been talking a lot about this, about connections. Actually having those connections with the individual. Once again, let's broaden it, be it a child or an adult, to actually revisit a conversation, then it keeps that dialogue open and it shows that people are interested in what other people are talking about.
And I think when we think about reading, children are exposed to literacy and books through people reading to them. And they'll be listening. And their actual understanding of the words being said might not be huge. They're getting the rough gist of it. And other children, as you learn words, that picture in their mind will grow. And I think once you kind of learn to kind of build words together, you then hit words you won't understand. And I think like the word curious. The first time you read the word curious, you're like, you can work out roughly what it might be in your head, and you read it, you're going, but then the next sentence helps you understand by their actions what curious is. So reading kind of, you might hit a word you don't know. You read the next few sentences, you're going, okay, so kind of he was looking in. So curious might mean I want to know what, and it helps your definition. But I think most people, that's how they define words. It's that what's in a book, what happens next. So curious must mean this, but you're not 100% sure.
And what happens with that as well then is it helps them to build a model, build that scheme within their mind around what that word means and where that fits in with some of the other information they might learn, but also the skill that might be in terms of being curious yourself. And also what you're doing is you're constantly helping that young person to remain curious. They come into our classrooms in the early years, curious. They want to know what's what. And slowly, that's kind of beaten out of them. That's terrible. I don't mean beaten out, but it's kind of like, it's not beaten out physically, but it's actually that wanting or that desire or that awareness that they can be curious is kind of dampened down, because it's difficult to be curious because it means you've got to take risks. It means you've got to put yourself out there a little bit. Unfortunately, becoming a reader, that's all the things you have to do. Because if you're not trying, or if you're not curious about text, or if you're not thinking about words or using some of the skills you might have learned about how to tackle words in those situations, you're actually not going to be able to get that success, which is going to give you that, oh, I'm a reader, I can read that. And actually it's that cortisol kind of chemical reaction in our brains, which then encourages us to try it again. Because actually, eventually you're going to have a mistake, or you're going to, it's going to have a failure. What I love, Dale, is you've asked, on these podcasts, is to make sure we have no sounds. Anyway, we've got a helicopter flying overhead.
I was trying to work out who's got the helicopter, who's called in the RAF.
It's mine. It's just arrived for after the podcast.
Is that from? Was it Cold Rose?
Yes, yeah, probably. Or it could be the sea one. It could be the rescue one. But anyway, there you go.
Yeah.
But again, you want to, and actually, even about something like that, you want our young people to have the vocabulary and the language to express the thoughts that they might have had about seeing a helicopter. Because that's, and that's all that cultural capital of being able to be in a situation where they can discuss something and they've got the confidence in their own kind of oral language. Because it all starts with that kind of us listening and being responded to about the sounds that we make, that being built on as, oh, it's meaningful. When I make a sound, someone pays attention to me, responds to me, and you start to get that shared attention around things. And then that becomes, your first babbling sounds and your first kind of sounds that are made. When you realize this is meaningful, I make something, a sound, and someone does something. They are attributing meaning to something. And it's that constant repetition of that throughout our early development that supports us with that development of oral language, which then gives us that understanding words have meaning. Words are important. Things around me have kind of labels and words that I can use to talk about them. And then once you start having that kind of positive reinforcement around that, you've then got those foundations to grow. And for many of our learners, many of our neurodiverse learners, many of our learners with those additional needs, they haven't had enough opportunity for that to happen in that meaningful way for loads of reasons, not because of want of people giving them the chance to do that. But actually, it's more about the fact that, that may have been language delays there. There may have been issues with processing of the information. They may get the responses to the sounds they make, but actually it's the time taken to get that was the sound I made and that was the response that happened. So there's so many kind of barriers that we need to be aware of, which therefore means we need to immerse them in more opportunities for that. And that's where the foundations are.
And I just think of just that helicopter, it's being in the moment. So rather than going, oh, the helicopter is annoying us and getting in the way of what we were trying to do. Oh, now it's gone now, let's continue on. You can go, cool, that's a bit of a loud noise. Yep. And you can talk about and describe the sound and talk about something about it. If you're in the classroom and you're doing something, you open up the blinds, you go, rather than just going and carry on, you go, oh, it's a bit bright out. You're kind of using that language to describe what's going on rather than just rushing past it. Actually talk about things and use that descriptive language to help people kind of access. For some children, they'll be accessing or hearing that word for the first time. And
what an interesting word as well.
And maybe you're kind of, and other children are going, oh, yeah, that was loud. And they understand that. It's helping them understand. So everyone's going to be in a different place due to whatever they've read or things at home. But we need to spend more time describing events. Oh, can anyone smell that? Oh, smells like we've got sausages. It's quite, and you'll describe the smell or things like that. Or, oh, can anyone smell the grass? That's quite a sweet smell. But all those sort of things, you just take time to describe. And you're kind of building that vocabulary.
Yeah, and being in the moment, as you said, I think before, being present, being in the moment, being aware. But again, that's about being aware that that's important. And I think that's the key. Sometimes if in a classroom that's really busy, I've got to get through this module. I've got to get through this topic. I've got to get through this part of my math session. And you forget that actually the more words we give our young people, the more kind of words that we lay in that foundation for them, the more opportunities they're going to have to grow those words into kind of like meaning and schema and their thoughts about the world around them.
I think it's really interesting when we're talking about lost opportunities and the treadmill of education that we can feel that we're on. And the fact that I think sometimes teachers can actually have in the forefront of their mind, am I allowed to do that? Am I allowed to go off the script? And I think sometimes educators need someone to give them permission. I'm thinking of a time when I was in the classroom, there was a squirrel outside. You make that immediate decision whether you say, children, look this way, it's only a squirrel, or you embrace it for what it is and go, oh my goodness, there's a squirrel. You may not talk about it then, but what an amazing opportunity to have that conversation with all of the children, and even then to change it from words to write it down so that then they can read it. And I think that is joining the dots, isn't it? And embracing it, and it's something real for the children. I also think we can move on a little bit fast. When I was in the classroom, I remember I was doing the Highwayman, and I had to stop and go, actually, even if the children read this, there are too many words that they don't understand what they mean. Let's just stop. Yeah. Let me find a video. Let's discuss it. Let's discuss all the language. And we're talking year 5, 6. Of course, we're talking year 5, 6. And then we had those conversations. And then when they read the text, they could picture it more. I think that's where I'm coming back to as well, because we're talking about decoding, but actually decoding a word, being able to say a word, like you said, Dale, that's one thing, but being able to picture it in your mind, I think we have to make sure that there is a connect, and that we are kind of, it's not even brave enough, but sometimes go, do you know what, we're going to stop, because I now realize we need to do this, watch a video, or I quite like pictures with the words so that the children have them together as well. Just looking at those different ways for children to understand the text more.
And I think, no, absolutely, Ginny. And I think that was something I was just going to say then as well, because it's really important that we're aware of helping to put those images, some of the images in their minds. Some children might not have seen a squirrel, a highwayman kind of, and you think about like how some of these things we may take for granted that children have any concept of what we're talking about. And I mean, I've seen some fabulous practice currently in classrooms and just that's shared online, looking at that importance of actually having that vocabulary list with pictures. And actually, now part of my practice when I go in and advise and support and is just saying that there's a core board or a vocabulary bank or whatever, however you have it, that goes with every book. So you can have that. You've got widget, you've got imprint, all those kind of really great ways to quickly make symbols. You've got clicker, and actually having the word and the picture there. No one has to ask. It's just there as a prompt. And then if children can read the word anyway, it doesn't matter. They could use it in their writing, it doesn't matter. If they struggle with literacy, if they struggle with print, actually having the picture gives them that support straight away. And if all you want them to do is use that vocabulary, which is the foundation we're talking about here, that oral language, that building vocabulary is the absolute paramount thing that we've got to do for every learner all the time. As we get into our GCSEs, we're thinking of some really complex vocabulary. Let's have the images that support that. And actually having that resource bank there and from the start, that universal provision is just key. So that.
Mm.
That highwayman is a really interesting thing because we all know what a highwayman is. And I don't know why we know. It might be that there were more films about the Scarlet Pimpernel, Black Beauty, there's some Carry On film or something back in the time. There was more of that on TV. When we see the highwayman or we hear the highwayman, we're instantly transported to horse-drawn carriages being chased by a man on a horse.
And a man
who wants to rob them.
Highway person.
Yes. Whereas if you say like a highwayman, so somebody wanted to rob you, they're probably going, but you're driving down the road. How are they going to get in your... There's a lot of context within that phrase, the highwayman. You kind of have to know, do they have all the building blocks to understand, it's a highwayman. It's like, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? What does that mean? How much danger is it? All those sorts of things.
But also, Dale, how interesting. How interesting is it? Like how interesting, and it's about looking at those light bulb kind of aspects or moments where you can go, oh, I don't really know. How do we feel about this? And you're saying that, is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? But also, what does it make you think of? So you've opened a door to have that fabulous shared interactive conversation. And we know that's lacking within home environments, for many reasons, the kind of, increase of screens and digital computer games, also the pandemic, everything, the conversations and the chance to kind of have those conversations sometimes. My poor son, I'm desperately trying to do it all the time. He's 9 and he's kind of like, is it finished now? Can I go? Have we finished talking? And actually, if you can get something like, something that's interested them. And I think even this morning I was reading with him this morning, and it was a phonics book, and we were doing something, and there was an interesting word, which I again can't think of now, over 50. And we actually had a conversation about the word, and he was telling me what it meant, and we were talking about it. And I just suddenly was like, oh, this is so precious. And actually, because I know this is important, but if you don't know that's important, if you don't know if you're out somewhere, and I think Ginny and I were talking about the word insect, that sometimes, actually having that concept, what is an insect and what are we talking about? Actually, if you don't have that background knowledge and that foundation, you're not going to be able to grow that vocabulary.
No.
And I think it comes back to finding time to talk. And I think it's finding time to talk within the classroom. And I know during the pandemic, there was something called Pobble 365, which I used a lot, which was images, fascinating images, which children, we all loved because we were all able to talk about it and ask questions. And I think the world is a very busy place. And I think finding time to talk is very important. I think we will talk about this more in another episode, but I think this extending this to the home, about actually time to talk at home, and talking and walking, and when can we have those conversations? I have some of my best conversations with my son in the car.
Absolutely.
We're next to each other. We have those conversations. Yeah. He can't get away from me, but we have those conversations. And it's going a little bit off piece, but also that considering meal times, not having your phones with you, so that you do have those conversations, so that the meal time is a time to talk. And, I sound very ancient, but, when I was young, that was the norm. And I'd be really interested to know what percentages are for families, sitting down to have those meals together, or having that time to talk, because it can be seen as reading can be reading. And I've tried to get him to read at home and he won't, and it's like, that there are, it's not about putting up a barrier. It's about broadening out and extending vocabulary by having those conversations and those two-way conversations.
And it's really interesting, Ginny, actually, because I'm sat there thinking, we don't eat together, but for many, many, many reasons. And I would love to do that, but my son's very hungry at much earlier stage, and my partner gets home, and actually a hungry 9-year-old boy, forget it. Let's just get the feeding, have that sort of happening. But actually, and so families, I think there's pressure sometimes, and I think within the classroom as well, it's the same thing. But if people can understand that importance of those language-rich environments, which books give you that chance. And I think, Ginny, you showed a fabulous book. Sorry, you did show that wonderful book that you had. And I've got lots beside me. I know it's a podcast, but I've got some Walter Wicks books and optical tricks. And again, just having, like you were saying about Pobble, an image. And on the other side are just, so you've got an image and there's some prompts to just think about that image. And I've had families that have kind of spoken to me after some of my training to say, I didn't think about Where's Wally books as actually reading. And anything, maps, recipes, anything that you can get that encourages that shared attention, first of all. And then when you've got that shared attention, that you can have something which, and it can be on a screen, it doesn't have to not be on a screen, but actually, if you can encourage that understanding around, some of this wonderful printed material. I've got a great books where it's something like a poem a day, or advent calendars at Christmas. I had a brilliant Tom Gates advent calendar, and each day had a little book. I had a brilliant Minecraft one this year that each day had something they had to make. So it had instructions in it. So you'd open it and then you'd make something. And it was just all of those little chunks of things that create the foundations and that help us to build up. And I think I was listening to a webinar with Alex Quigley last night. He was talking about reading miles. And actually, reading miles, our learners who struggle, have those additional needs, have for whatever reason, have a barrier, don't get enough miles built up. And it's actually, if we look at it like that, like, they've managed to, we've got a joke book, or we've got whatever we have, we've got jokes in the crackers, thinking about Christmas, or we've got something which is, that they've had a chance to read a little bit of text. Actually, that we can be like, oh, there you go, bung that in the reading miles. Even think about representing that visually. How many words have we read today? Wow, look at that. So what you're trying to do is think about, why is that important? Because we have to practice this skill in order for it to develop, in order for that foundation, those foundation bricks that we've put in place. Great oral language. I say this, it looks like that on paper, but actually we have to have that again and again and again. Not only does it look like that, I can read it. And then I can read it goes from, I'm going to try and read this. And you might not get it right. So you might then not want to do it again. And you're going to have to keep on going with the foundation skills and then go back to, I can read it. But if you can think about those reading miles, or that kind of opportunity for that, shared interaction over something which gets you to talk, to read, to write something down, that is key. Doesn't have to be the reading book at home, can be the shopping list.
I remember when I was young, it was, my parents would say, oh, we need to go here. Which way do we go? They'd basically make me read road signs. They knew which way to go.
Yep.
But they'd look and go, right, which way? And you'd look up and there's like, one we're going with C, one we're going with S. Well, no, we're going with S, so it's going to be the S one. You might not read the whole word. You might just start with that first letter. But it's going to help you in having those conversations, recognizing shops. So where are we going? And you'll say the name of the shop and you let them find it. It's little things like that, which is just slowing down your life slightly and giving opportunities for them to lead, them time to pay attention and be curious about the environment they're in and reading those things rather than just following you, helping them develop that curiosity.
And looking out for, and that's all independence, that whole understanding around, why am I even bothering with this skill of learning to read? Actually, it's because it's going to help you make choices. Even if it's your takeaway choices or your choices on, Spotify, or your whatever it is, it's going to help you make choices about the words that you want to use. It's going to help you communicate how you feel, what you want to say about something which is important to you. And so it's not that I want you to do it because you're going to be able to do this or for academic achievement, which of course is fabulous. They have to want to do it. You have to get someone to kind of like want to read. You can't make someone read. And so it's all of those key aspects around it, and celebrating. Wow, look at that. You read that really well. God, look, did you know you could do that? All of those things are so important to build up those foundations.
And interesting. Go on, Ginny.
I think it's fascinating when you look to see where reading is happening around you. So I was in the supermarket the other day and there was a grown-up who cares about a child. I love that saying. Grown-up who cared about a child out with a child who was probably 2 years old. And they were going round the supermarket and they were chatting about everything they were buying. And then the wonderful moment happened when they finished, they'd been self-scanning, they finished the shopping and the receipt came out. And the adult said, "Way, here we go, that's for you." And so the child got that receipt as the document, as the receipt. But I think that's really important, Sarah, because that child is actually knowing that that is the process, then that is the receipt. And I know that given time, that child will understand more, that there are words on there, that the words mean things. And I just think that is such a lovely, real way of understanding print for meaning.
And the other thing around that is, why do we get a receipt? Because it's to show us what we paid for. And actually, did they do it right? Did they put something through twice? Yeah. Is it okay? Is it correct? There's so many skills in that. And actually, when you're unpacking the shopping, can they hold the receipt and be like ticking off the things that we've got? But all of those skills around understanding why I think now it's lost a lot of what we do in terms of putting things down on paper or reading. And I love that idea, actually, Ginny, that you would kind of like take a workplace or take an environment and spot where reading's important. I think that's a great activity or great thing to do. You know, actually, how do you find things on the shelves? How do you know where things are located? What brands do you like? There's loads of information around that in terms of supporting the literacy that's involved in that's great.
And reading the list, the simplicity, making the list, reading the list. I love your idea of the youngster crossing them out or being shown where to cross them out. It's reading for purpose, which is great.
And the meaning behind it. I have to say at that point, sorry, really quickly, I've got a new Kindle and it's a Kindle Scribe. Have you tried one of those, Dale?
No. What's a Kindle Scribe?
So it's got a pen and pencil, a thing. So it's the best. So you can write on it. Just thinking then about making lists, but also then what you do is you can have your book. So you have your book and you can actually write on the book and you can make notes on the book. You can have lots of things you can do. But it made me think then we need to be modeling as much as possible the way when we're recording information, when we're reading information, when we're looking for something, because for our young people, it looks like we're just using our phones. And even, when I talk to my son, he's like, well, you're looking at your phone. And I said, well, I've got my Kindle app and I'm reading my book. And he's like, are you? Let's have a look. But actually, it's trying to take it as much as possible, take that out of technology where we can and model, because actually it's that modeling behaviors that's so important.
And sometimes it's taking it out of technology, but it's also taking it out of our head. So you might have your shopping list in your head, but if you write your shopping list down and then just give it to them, put it in a rough order, we go, cool, right, I'll follow you. They're in charge. They're going to take you around the supermarket. You can mark things off. Have we missed anything? You know you've missed something. You've watched them, but can they spot, can they read and match up that word to what's in the shopping basket? If they've not seen that word, and you can talk about being when you've had it at home, to help them think about what it might look like and where it might be. So there's all that conversation, all that describing words will happen to help them find those things.
Yeah. And also, Dale, with all of that, actually, that made me just think then as well, with all of this foundation and kind of oral language and vocabulary, storytelling. The first kind of developmental stage within storytelling is that audio storytelling, that kind of like, and historically and culturally, that's how we shared information about our communities, about our societies, about our rules, was through, this kind of oral storytelling. And actually, I was just thinking then, how wonderful if you made a story about your trip to the shop and one of the kind of pages was the receipt. And then you could actually have some information about that receipt and about kind of what the information it contains, or, and again, you can use speech to text, text to speech. You can do all of those ways to get the information. But all of a sudden, you've got one thing, you've got another thing, you've got an event, you've got a narrative, you've got a kind of a sequence, and it's a story. And so as soon as you start kind of supporting young people as well, so even when you're kind of maybe on the way somewhere and you create a journey, a story about your journey to the park. So you're talking and you're sequencing things into that kind of this happened, then this happened. And then, oh my goodness, there was a problem. And then we solved it through this. All of that kind of talk for writing stuff, all of that sort of thinking of things in that meaningful way and having that interactive dialogue is just key. It's key to help young people to build up those foundations that they need for them when they move through to writing.
And I think kind of extending on that, I find that when we have children who sometimes find it a little bit difficult to settle in school in the mornings, this idea of having that transference of a story from home to school, that really helps, the picture of their pet or a picture of something that they've done, that then becomes a transition picture or a transition object that then helps the child kind of see the movement from home to school. It's easier for them, and I find that works really, really well, because and children are able to talk about their pet that they know very well, and it as we said, calms things down for everyone, because we're going back to connection again, aren't we? The connection is really important.
And it's connection, it's predictability, it's consistency
Yes.
Within all of that. And that's the thing about stories and books as well. They are predictable, they are consistent.
Yes.
There is a kind of like a consistent language or a consistent sequence of events. And that's what's really impactful for our learners. And that actually, even that thing of thinking of the transition into school, a story about that transition into school, that's that power of social stories. And actually looking at how can we think about language within that? Maybe we're going to use some rhyming words. Maybe we're going to use, or the same predictable sentence, the same consistent sentence all the way through. All of that provides young people with that opportunity to build those foundations about language has meaning. This is the way language works. This is the way sentences work. This is the root of comprehension. The root of comprehension is that words make me feel something or make me feel or do something. And that's what we want our young people to, from the very start, understand that. Because if you're 16 on that reading journey, it's really tricky to kind of get those foundations in place. Yeah.
What I like is when the kids was young, and that squirrel or even the helicopter is a great example of you see something and then you're using descriptive language. Oh, there's a squirrel. Oh, what's it doing? It's running around. I wonder where it's running. Why is it running? You start having those conversations. You might think it's being chased or it's hunting for food. And you kind of help develop that idea with your child. And you end up creating a story. Now, that helicopter, you look up, you heard a loud helicopter. Where's it going? What's it going to happen? And they help develop that. Often they need something to spark their idea off, and seeing the helicopter going overhead or seeing that squirrel dancing, why is it jumping around? Why is it running around? Why is it run up the fence? Has it seen something? You can create that. And another thing you touched on is, I think for young children, that writing seemed like quite an adult thing. I'm not there for writing yet. It's something that adults access. And either you helping write that story and you writing it down or typing it up, or even better, if they can use speech to text and do it on their own, and they have their own story and they can hand it to someone and someone can read their story, that is so empowering for that child.
And I think that's the really important part as well, is just that empowering. I think, having that, I'm just looking here because I was just trying to remember, there's a free app, Our Story, actually, that is, again, really quite simple to use. But anything that enables you to either use pictures or use drawings, and then however you get that writing in that's not the most important part. The most important part is that writing says what you want it to say about that picture or that event or that feeling. And I think that, again, within our classrooms, it's that moving away from the spelling and the kind of that real understanding that they have to put it in a certain way to actually, it has to reflect what they want to say, but it has to be able to be read by other people. I think that's really, really important as well. So we've got to get it in, and that's why the writing system is the way it is. And that's why the letters and sounds are the way they are, because it's an agreed system, which means that everybody, once they've learnt that alphabetic code, can access that print. And actually all of that is part of the foundation as well. Like, what's the point? Why do we have these things? What's the use? And you've got some brilliant assistive technology now, and you've got some great programs. You've got Book Creator, which is so simple to use. And you've got, there's so many that I could say. But again, it's seeing why that's important.
It's interesting. One of the hardest ways to write is using your hand, but it's the dominant way of writing. You could speak and it write it down. You could type on a keyboard, it would write it down. No, I've got to write an A the correct way, with the correct spacing, the correct shaping, the correct height next to the next letter so someone can understand it. And it's such a barrier for some children to get those thoughts out. And it can be just that writing can be such a huge barrier for the physical process. Yet we want their ideas. They've got great ideas. They've got great imagination. Let's remove some of these barriers. Let's do it a different way so they can feel proud of their writing
and feel proud of themselves. And I think that's sorry, Ginny, I'll be quick. That's the really important thing with reading as well, is that the barrier sometimes is in place right across. If they've struggled with print, and if they're still at that kind of like early decoding stage and their awareness of some words and they're able to read, but actually once they sit down in their classroom, and often from year 2 upwards, the maths textbooks, the science worksheets, or anything that has a little bit, anything more than 3 words together in a sentence, it's that overwhelm. And for those learners who are struggling, those learners who learn differently with additional needs, actually what happens is that text is not accessible to them. That's not inclusive for them, which means they begin to struggle in science and they begin to struggle in maths. And I'm seeing this so often now, and we have got so much assistive technology, which means that shouldn't be a barrier. We should have that plan from the start. We've got our maths scheme. We've got whatever maths work that we're doing. We know that it's going to involve written mathematical problems. Now, the skill we want them to develop is how to solve that problem. It's not to be able to read that language first. You've not just got the issue of the reading, you've got the issue of the vocabulary that's being used, the sequencing of the information, the remembering, the retrieval then of what the actual question was. There's so much there that actually it's too much. And our job is to take away the bits that are too much. So we have, and if we take away anything from this podcast, it's the fact that you've got that oral language, the foundation there that's being built. You've got all the other stuff that's being built. Throughout this is the confidence. And throughout this is that I can do it. It's not if I see print, I can't access it. If you keep giving them situations where you're building them up here in their intervention or here with the support sessions, and then in the main class, they're then being faced with lots of text they can't read, that's not going to have made any difference to them. So we've got to be able to give them that chance to read it if they've got a screen reader, if they've got some form of way of having it, somebody have it read to them, a reading pen, some way, or symbols that very simplified language with some pictures that give you access to what the text means. Great. We've got to think about that from the start. It shouldn't be, oh, you're going to find that hard to read. Here's a reading pen. Because then immediately the child's like, well, I don't find it hard to read. Don't single me out, and then they won't want to use it. So we've got to be thinking about this important of these foundations of not only are we developing these, but we're constantly keeping the confidence up, and we're making sure that young people go, that's all right, I can use this if I want to do this because this is about my maths. Doesn't matter, I find this text hard to read. And actually it's got to be again and again and again supported. So you just made me think then when you're saying about the barriers, because it's so key. There's barriers that we completely, for some reason, don't notice.
And you've said exactly what I was going to say. Actually, it's about our cult. No, in a great way, it's about the culture that we nurture, and about having exactly what you've spoken about as the norm. I think we also need to look at, and I'm hoping we will touch on this in another episode, the number of books, the range of books. We've all been in that classroom where subliminally you've reached it if you've got that big, thick Harry Potter book on your desk, and I want to take that away and for it to be, okay, what are you going to read today? What might you read tomorrow? Non-fiction, fiction, a leaflet, a comic, so that it, as my wonderful Yorkshire father would say, it calms the job down, so that everybody feels valued with what they're reading, and that they want to share what they're reading with everybody in this culture of reading different things is great. And we read different, I think I'll end with, do you know what? I read different things on different days according to actually how I'm feeling. So let's mirror that to the children as the norm.
And actually make them feel that that's okay. And I think that's a really important message, Ginny, actually, because it is at different days, you do read different things in different ways. Sometimes you might want to read your Kindle. I might want an audio book some days, or I might want to have an actual book. And actually, it's about making those differences normal. And that's the whole thing around thinking about our classrooms. They're changing. And we've got to have these things built from the start. And again, I think, there's been discussion around things like this reading cluster. Like if it is Harry Potter, the book itself is really intimidating. And it's only been, again, as I say, my son's just started in year 4 to do, that's the topic for this term. And it's a great, fabulous, but it's a big book. And I started reading it and I was just like, oh my goodness, it's a lot of quite complex text that if you're struggling with processing information, it's actually too much. Yep. Go on, Dale.
One of the things I was going to go was we talked about like using widget and symbols, and we talk about reading scanning pens. And the scanning pens is great if you're struggling to decode the words. But it's not going to change that level, that reading age of this text. And that's one of the things which is I love about AI.
Yeah.
And it's things about is if in your classroom, you're a year 6 teacher, what's the reading age of all of your children? Yeah, think about your reading age, and in any text you're using, what's the reading age of that text? And one of the things I'm going to quick play with after this is I'm going to drop some text into ChatGPT and go, what's the reading age? Because one of the things, if you're kind of doing this topic, and yes, it's a year 6 topic, you've got that year 6 resource, but actually within your class, the average reading age is actually age 9, not age 11. They're going to struggle to access that text. So you could drop it into ChatGPT, go rewrite this text with a reading age of 9 or 8, whatever age, and simplify some of those words, which just makes it more accessible. We kind of bring in that text so they can access it, they can read it, and they can understand it. And my other point with Harry Potter is those books are big and scary.
Yeah.
And my daughter refused to read big and scary books until I snuck one onto her Kindle. Because on a Kindle, you do not see the thickness. And you've got Harry Potter on your Kindle and you do not see the thickness. You can start reading without being intimidated. And then you'll just keep turning the page and you keep turning and you don't realize how many pages there are because it's hidden. And yeah, I had to explain to my daughter that the book she read was A Golden Acorn, which is free on Amazon, the first book. And I was like, you read it? She went, yeah. I went, you've read that? I'm telling what she told me. I went, and I pointed out that the book was 350 pages long. And the look on her face when I then got another book, which is that book, and she'd realized she'd read that book she was scared of. And she just snuck in.
And that's so, that's so important. And I think also when you're thinking about, you're thinking of Harry Potter, so have your abridged versions with AI, fabulous. You can also, when you drop it in, ask them for some of the key vocabulary in the book, the tier 2 and the tier 3 particularly. So you can have your core cards, your vocabulary cards, your word bank with that information on and the picture. So you're constantly reinforcing as you're reading the story. Oh, that's that word. Oh, we found that word kind of difficult to think about what that meant. And now we're kind of really getting familiar with it. But also I found secondhand books kind of things is illustrated Harry Potter. So actually thinking about reading it at night, because even when I was reading the text and I was trying to bring all the voices to life and give the kind of, to make it more accessible, actually it still wasn't really, because it's a lot of words. And I could see my son kind of switching off a bit and desperately trying to, because he knows I really want him to be read to and to enjoy it. So he really wants to enjoy it as well. And I thought, actually, what we need here is what Ginny has there, a great image. We need a great image to go, oh, we've listened to this bit of text. Let's process this. And while we're processing it, let's have a look at this image and see what we think about whether this is a great way of showing what we've just read. And so actually with that, you straight away have got a way into the story, which is why, sensory stories work, which is why stories that have got immersive stories, which have got props work, which is why puppets and all of those things, you're bringing the print to life. So children have got another way to think about the words they've heard and to process the words they've heard and to get them physically within their brain, physically thinking that they can be attached to something. The other thing just on that before I finish is just, the reading miles kind of conversation was the other book that I saw was a year of Harry Potter. And what that has in it is for every day, it has a quote from one of the books. So it has a snippet of text, which is so accessible. So you can look at the day. And I think we were talking about that, about our birthdays and, again, thinking about dates that are important to the young people. Let's see what it says on this date. Oh, what do you think that means? And again, maybe you can pull that out, give it to AI to actually make it, make a comedy version, make a grime rap about it, make a kind of cartoon episode about it. But all of those things are helping with the reading miles, but they're also helping with that cluster of information around that model that you're making about Harry Potter, about the author, about the book, about the vocabulary, about the story. And that's the key part. So I think for me to finish on, it's thinking around whatever we're doing, think of putting a chunk into some kind of model that your child is making about the world around them. And it doesn't have to be the same model each time. So they can be whatever the schema is they're making around how they're thinking about something. And often it's the factual stuff which they really get into, the science, the kind of, the stuff which, how things work, or the physical aspects of the design and technology, or anything that they can. So some of the language and vocabulary around that is going to be more meaningful to them than the language of stories. So it's to be aware of that.
Ginny's nodding lots.
I think my final is, think about what are your reading miles. And we've had a conversation about this, and I've become very aware because interestingly, I've kept many of the books from when I was a young child. Mine were, Sarah and I were talking about this, mine were poetry books. Mine were 365 days of the year. And I realized most books that I liked when I was younger are small snippets. And I think if we bring it back to ourselves and go, actually, what are my reading miles? What do I like to read? It might not be that children might like that, but I think to bring it back to us, what did I like to read when I was young? And I find that's really, really helpful with me because, I chat to the children and then we find books that they like, and I can relate to it from when I was young.
So my final bit is just going to be thinking about with your reading, with your children's reading, is it's got to be accessible and it's got to be engaging for them. So that is in terms of like the level of the text. And if you're reading about the Highwayman or Harry Potter and it says the word hippogriff or whatever, you're going, well, what is that? What is a hippogriff? It's a made up thing. It doesn't really exist. But once you see one and you see how big it is in a picture, when you read that text again, now it makes more sense. So when you're reading things, think about the accessibility, think about their own experiences, their understanding of that text. Because often they're not engaged because they do not have the understanding that you have. And it's that building that world, that model of information, as you said, Sarah, that really helps them understand and find it interesting. Otherwise, you're just saying words which make no sense. And it is going to be like, well, this will be over soon because I'm really bored. But actually, it's the understanding that drives that love of reading. And
it's the understanding. I'm not going to say final anymore, Dale, because I think it's very helpful. But it's that you've hit that absolutely on the head, because it is that unless they see it as meaningful, unless they see it as interesting, unless they see it as engaging, they're not going to give their active attention. And our learners have to be able to give their active attention to something in order to be able to learn. And if we look at now, YouTube, TikTok, all of those very short kind of bits of information that you get within that, harness that. A YouTube, and I think that's something I've been talking with my son, there's a script behind that. They've thought about their ideas. They've created an ideas board with the things that are going to happen. This, and then this will happen. Straight away, you've got a narrative. Straight away, you've got a way into using your oral language with your ideas about something to make something which somebody else can appreciate. But it involves those reading skills, those literacy skills, that sentence, the comprehension. All of those things are so key. And I think for the next session, what we're going to look at then is look at that kind of connection to phonics and thinking about those next bits of the kind of the building blocks, that phonological awareness, all of those key things. But oral language is so important.
Anything last to say, Ginny, before I wrap up?
No, I shall allow you to wrap up with a big bow.
Oh, I like the bow. See, I like that because now that's given me that thought within my mind about the big bow.
Nice,
what colour would
visual.
it be? Yeah.
There we go.
To me, I've just realised that poetry is short form writing now. It's like a short form video. Poetry is a short form story. But that's a whole other thing my head's exploring. So thank you for coming on the show today. Thank you for letting me speak between you two.
Pleasure.
I love it. As always, I will share useful links from today's show in the show notes. So we've got lots of information, links to Sarah and Ginny's contact details, and also links to their books. And as always, you'll find the show notes on the website or wherever you listen to the podcast. So thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. You'll find links to subscribe generally wherever you're listening to the podcast. And please follow us on the socials, on Twitter at The SENCast, on Facebook, The SENCast, on Instagram, The SENCast, and on TikTok, just SENCast. I don't know what we're on Blue Sky yet, but we're on Blue Sky now. And everyone knows B Squared for helping schools to show the small steps of progress pupils with SEND make. And over the last few years, we've been creating an inclusive assessment system that can be used with all pupils in primary schools. The system has different levels of details for different levels of ability, but it makes looking at whole school data and comparing your SEND and your non-SEND pupils really, really simple. It also reduces teacher workload by only having to use one system, and our new features to simplify report writing using AI is really, really cool. And finally, it saves schools money. If you're interested and want to find out more, you can find a link to the website and to book a meeting with me in the show notes, and you find out all the other stuff we do. So thank you for listening. We'll be back soon with another episode of the SENCast. It is goodbye from me.
Goodbye from me.
Goodbye from us all.
Bye.